Let me tell you about a war. It's not fought with guns or soldiers, though. This is a war fought with paper, with legal filings, and where the most powerful weapon is the rulebook itself. We're about to dive into a high-stakes legal battle that pits a single homeowner against a corporate giant, in a fight where the rules of the game are literally everything.
You know, this quote from a psychologist who looked at the case files, it cuts right to the heart of what's going on. This is a classic David versus Goliath story for the modern age. A battle not about brute strength, but about sheer endurance inside the incredibly dense, complicated world of the legal system. So, how did this whole thing kick off? Well, the first shot in this procedural war was fired by the homeowner himself, a man named Jeremy Bass. And because he was representing himself, he made a pretty serious and direct accusation against the powerful lawyers on the other side. So, on December 4th, 2024, Jeremy Bass files this motion. And he's not just disagreeing with the opposing lawyers, he's accusing them of actively misleading the court. He claims the attorneys for the corporate plaintiffs were putting information they knew to be demonstrably false right there in their court documents.
So what was this statement they made? Well, the lawyers basically said that Bass had done nothing, that he just sat on his hands and didn't pursue his claims. But here's the thing. Bass had the receipts. He pointed to a whole other lawsuit as concrete proof that what they were saying just wasn't true. He argued this wasn't some simple mistake. It was a calculated lie to make him look bad, to paint him as negligent in front of the judge.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. How does a regular homeowner, representing himself, actually fight back against a legal powerhouse? Well, Bass's response wasn't just reactive. It was a really clever legal move that basically used the court's own rules as a weapon.
He didn't come out swinging asking for big fines or punishments. Instead, he asked the judge for a judicial admonishment. Now, that might sound kind of soft, right? Just a formal warning, but the strategy behind this was absolutely razor sharp.
And this right here, this shows you the genius of the move, because Bass was representing himself, what's called pro se. He knew the rules. He knew that if he asked for formal sanctions, it would trigger this thing called a 21-day safe harbor period. It's basically a get-out-of-jail-free card. It gives the lawyers 3 weeks to just say, oops, our mistake, withdraw their statement, and boom, no consequences, and the case gets delayed. By asking just for an admonishment, Bass sidestepped that whole delay and forced the court to look at the issue right then and there.
It was all about controlling the clock. Bass's tactic was designed to stop his opponents from using a delay to their advantage. He wanted to keep the spotlight shining right on their alleged misconduct. And, it was also a subtle way of reminding the judge, hey, it's your job to make sure everyone is playing by the rules in your courtroom.
But this war of procedure, it wasn't just being fought in legal documents. It was taking a huge psychological toll on the man right at the center of it all. Let's talk about the human cost.
Yeah, according to Dr. Sanford, the language in Bass's legal filings tells a much deeper story. She says they're not just legal arguments. They are, and I'm quoting, expressions of existential distress. Beyond all the legal jargon, she sees the words of a person under unbelievable pressure, facing the loss of his home while trying to navigate this incredibly complicated system all by himself.
And this is what was at stake. $305,000. That was the equity he had built up in his home. And that's not just a number, right? That's a life's investment. And it was all on the line.
And this was the cost of just staying in the fight. Every single month, another $1,400 gone, draining his resources for housing and storage while he was just trying to keep this legal battle going. The financial bleed was relentless.
This whole situation creates this really fascinating paradox. On one hand, you see Bass in his filings, meticulously accounting for every single dollar, but on the other hand, you see this raw, inflammatory language that is born from pure desperation. And that contrast really paints a vivid picture of someone struggling to balance rational arguments with just the overwhelming emotional stress of it all.
Now remember that very first motion, the one about attorney misconduct? Well, it turns out it was way more than just a procedural squabble. It was the first domino in a chain reaction that would end up deciding the entire case.
One legal expert put it perfectly. The court's choice to not formally address the alleged misconduct wasn't some minor detail. No, it was the critical turning point that directly shaped everything that came after it.
In the legal world, they call this a procedural chain reaction.
It's when a small decision early on starts to snowball. It just builds this unstoppable momentum that can end up determining the final fate of a case, sometimes completely separate from the actual facts.
And you can see the dominoes fall right here. First, the court decides not to act on the misconduct claim. So because of that, the story the plaintiffs were telling about Boss, that he was negligent, was allowed to just stand there, completely unchallenged. And that unchallenged narrative then led the court to dismiss his entire defense as frivolous. Once you get that label, it's pretty much game over. That frivolous finding became the justification for every single ruling against him after that.
That one single word, frivolous, became the linchpin. It was the critical piece that held the entire case against Bass together. And you can trace it all the way back to that early procedural decision to just ignore the allegations of attorney misconduct.
Now, this might seem like just one sad foreclosure story out of Idaho, but what happened here really reveals something much bigger, and frankly, much more important about our entire legal system. It's important to know that this story is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. It's part of a deep-dive investigative series looking into what some call the foreclosure machine. It's an exploration of how this incredibly powerful system works, who holds the power, and what happens when one person gets caught in its gears.
This single case raises these huge, crucial questions. I mean, how can a homeowner representing themselves ever really get a fair shake? Are the procedural rules really neutral when one side has unlimited resources? And how much does the behavior of lawyers and a court's willingness to police that behavior actually shape who wins and who loses? The answers could impact homeowner rights way beyond this one courthouse.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to chew on. In a system that is so incredibly complex, a system designed for professionals, what does a truly level playing field even look like? And how do we, as a society, make sure that justice is decided by the facts and not just by who can afford to play the game better?